Napoleon said, "History is a set of lies agreed upon." James Baldwin said, "People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We are not makers of history, we are made by history." Each piece acts as a snapshot, capturing who I was, what I was thinking, and how I was translating all of that into a physical medium at the time. But let's start at the beginning. I've been making things my whole life, but I started making what I would call art with a capital A about 14 years ago. Untitled, 2008. I was 16, an atheist and a budding leftist, and attending a very Catholic and very capitalist private school in Portland, Maine. At the time, I was heavily into graffiti and street art. I wanted to participate in the culture, but I couldn't really hack it doing graffiti on the street. So I made do with what I had at home. Spray paint from the hardware store, markers I found laying around the house, a post office address label, and an old ceiling tile that my mom brought home while cleaning offices. "I am become death, destroyer of worlds," is a quote from Robert Oppenheimer after the very first atomic bomb test. A period of history I was fascinated by at the time. Science is Magic That Works was written by Kurt Vonnegut in Cat's Cradle, which I read for English class. This piece is like a Polaroid of a messy room, but if that messy room was my teenage brain. Smoking Man, 2013. Fast forward 5 years, I've graduated high school, moved to Boston, and back to Maine. I'm living in the west end of the city and working as a barista. In many ways, I've started to find my voice, and I'm starting to more carefully consider the materials that I'm using to make art. After years of just using stuff I had laying around, this was the first real painting that I ever made. I actually went to the store, bought a pre-stretched canvas, and sat down with the intent to create a painting. My intent was to create a character that had just dropped acid and was experiencing synesthesia, or visually seeing the music that was playing in the background. I oscillated between painting the abstract background and the central figure, building the two in tandem. This was the first in a series of paintings that I made as unique pieces, which I would later call fictional portraiture. Crab, 2016. 3 years later, and I'm still living in the west end of Portland and still working as a barista. I've started to exhibit my work at local cafes and galleries, and I'm evolving to see each piece that I create as part of a larger whole, rather than just a one-off. This is one of what I ended up calling suspension paintings, using wire to suspend the painting in its frame and make the wall part of the experience of the object itself. Crab is part of a series I called Surf and Turf, examining the relationship between animals as beautiful sentient creatures and our use of them as food. I juxtapose these detailed and lovingly painted animals with pages from cookbooks detailing how to kill, butcher, and cook them. I've always been uncomfortable by our treatment of animals as a society. I hope someday that changes. Self-Portrait, 2017. After several years of stability, or stagnation depending on your perspective, everything changes. I've just ended a 9-year relationship, moved out of the apartment I'd lived in for about 5 years, and quit my coffee job. All of a sudden, I'm seeing myself and my work in a completely new light. I was living on my own for the first time, liberated and yet terrified of the unknown. This was the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. I felt empty and minimal, which I wanted to reflect by keeping this piece as simple and stripped down as possible. I used house paint, sign paint, glue, and found paper on canvas. One of many self-portraits I've done over the years. Maybe I'll cover those in a future video. Dunce, or An American Taxpayer, 2019. A few years later, and I'm now living with the woman who was to become my wife and living a more balanced and healthy life. I am calm and content with my identity as an artist. However, the Trump years really started to take a toll on my optimism, and this piece totally reflects that. A found object sculpture, or bricolage, using things I had collected over my entire life. Pages from a US Constitution, a vintage Kennedy Johnson pin, a vintage vote pin, cassette tape, wood, wire, and camera parts. All trash that I rescued or saved over the years. I made this during a time when I was really grappling with my political identity, when my view of the world started to coalesce into something much further left than the Democratic establishment. But more on that in a future episode. Since then, I got married. My son was born about a year later. Raising a kind, compassionate, happy, and healthy kid has taken up most of my time, but I'm still making things, and I still have so much that I want to say with my work. But that's a video for another day as well.